The morning sun streamed through the airport's massive glass windows as 12-year-old Anna clutched her favorite stuffed penguin, her eyes sparkling with excitement. This wasn't just any ordinary day. It was her first international flight, and despite the butterflies in her stomach, she couldn't stop smiling. She sat in her specialized wheelchair, a sleek piece of equipment that had become like a trusted friend over the years. Anna had been born with a rare genetic condition that affected her mobility, but anyone who spent more than 5 minutes with her knew that her spirit soared far beyond any physical limitations. Her infectious laugh and quick wit had a way of lighting up any room she entered. Today, she was especially proud of her new travel outfit. A cozy blue sweater with little airplanes embroidered on it, a gift from her dad for this special occasion. Speaking of her dad, being the daughter of former NBA legend Big Shaq O'Neal meant she was used to turning heads wherever they went. But today, she just wanted to be like any other kid going on vacation with their father. She had spent weeks planning this trip with him, marking places they would visit in her special travel journal, and practicing basic phrases in different languages using her tablet. The hustle and bustle of the airport fascinated her. She watched as business travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases. Families herded sleepy children toward their gates, and airport staff zipped around on small vehicles carrying luggage. The smell of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls wafted through the air from nearby cafes, mixing with the excitement that seemed to pulse through the terminal. Her dad had always taught her that her condition wasn't a limitation, but rather a unique way of experiencing the world. She decorated her wheelchair with small LED lights that twinkled like stars, making it look more like a magical chariot than medical equipment. Other kids often came up to her, fascinated by the lights, and she loved making new friends this way. As they waited in line at the check-in counter, Anna pulled out her tablet to show her dad the virtual tour of their destination she'd been studying. She had already memorized all the accessible routes at the famous museums they planned to visit. Her father beamed with pride as she explained their carefully planned itinerary, complete with backup plans for rainy days. The morning had started perfectly. They'd left home early to avoid traffic, shared their special father-daughter secret handshake for good luck, and even spotted a rainbow on their drive to the airport. Anna's dad had gone to park their car in a long-term parking lot, promising to return quickly with their smaller carry-on bags while she waited with their main luggage near the check-in area. Little did Anna know that this perfect morning was about to take an unexpected turn. As she sat there, double-checking their flight details on her tablet, she noticed some of the airport staff giving her strange looks. But she held her head high, just as her father had taught her. After all, this was supposed to be the beginning of their greatest adventure yet, and nothing could dampen her spirits, or so she thought. The terminal buzzed with activity around her, and Anna took it all in with wide-eyed wonder. She'd watched countless travel vlogs to prepare for this moment, but being here in person was so much more exciting. She adjusted her Lucky Charm bracelet, a gift from her grandmother, who always said that good things come to those who face life with a brave heart. If only she knew how much she would need that bravery in the next few minutes. The atmosphere at the security checkpoint shifted as Anna wheeled herself toward the line. She could feel the change in the air, like when storm clouds gather on what had been a sunny day. 2 security staff members, Officer Chen and Officer Roberts, exchanged glances that made Anna's stomach tighten. She'd seen those kinds of looks before, the ones that said, "This is going to be complicated." Anna took a deep breath, reminding herself of what her dad always said. Sometimes people just need a little patience and understanding. She reached for her medical documentation, neatly organized in a blue folder that she kept in her wheelchair's side pocket. The folder was decorated with stickers from her favorite travel destinations, places she dreamed of visiting one day. Everyone needs to keep moving. Officer Chen called out loudly, not even looking directly at Anna as she approached. The line behind her started to grow, and Anna could feel the weight of strangers' stares on her back. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to unzip her bag to get her ID ready, but she kept her chin up, just like her father had taught her. Officer Roberts sighed heavily, making no attempt to hide his annoyance. "This is going to hold up the whole line," he muttered to his colleague, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Anna's cheeks burned, but she tried to keep her voice steady as she explained about her wheelchair's special features. The morning rush hour crowd pressed in around them, their impatience adding to the tension in the air. A businessman checking his watch repeatedly, a mother trying to quiet her crying baby, and a group of tourists worried about making their connection. All of them now forced to wait as the situation unfolded. "Look, we have procedures," Officer Chen announced, her voice carrying across the checkpoint area. "You can't expect special treatment just because." She left the sentence hanging in the air, but her tone said everything she hadn't put into words. Anna's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. A few kind-hearted passengers tried to intervene. An elderly woman spoke up from the line. "She's just a child. Show some compassion." But this only seemed to make the security officers more defensive. Officer Roberts began roughly examining Anna's wheelchair, ignoring her quiet protests about the delicate equipment. "These modifications could be hiding anything," he declared, running his hands along the LED lights Anna had so proudly installed. "We'll need to do a complete inspection." The way he said it made her beloved wheelchair sound like something dangerous, something suspicious. The special cushions that helped support her back were removed and tossed aside carelessly. Anna watched helplessly as the officers treated her precious Independence aid like just another piece of luggage to be searched. Her travel journal slipped from her lap, scattering carefully planned itineraries across the floor. Some passengers had started recording the scene on their phones, which only made Anna feel more exposed. She wasn't a viral video waiting to happen. She was just a kid excited about her first big trip with her dad. Now that excitement was crumbling under the harsh fluorescent lights of the security checkpoint. A young boy in line whispered loudly to his mother, "Why are they being so mean to her?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating in its truth. Anna wished she could disappear, become invisible to all the staring eyes. She clutched her stuffed penguin tighter, drawing comfort from its familiar softness. Time seemed to slow down as the officers continued their exaggerated inspection. What should have been a routine screening had turned into a public spectacle. Anna's thoughts turned to her father. Where was he? He had only gone to park the car. Surely he would be back soon. She needed his strength now more than ever. The security officers' voices grew louder, their comments more pointed. "If people need so much special equipment, maybe they shouldn't be traveling." Officer Chen remarked to no one in particular, but making sure everyone could hear. The words hit Anna like a physical blow, challenging not just her right to fly, but her right to dream. Anna's hands shook as she tried to reach for her medical documentation again, the blue folder now crumpled from being handled roughly by the security officers. The morning light that had seemed so promising earlier now felt harsh and exposing through the terminal's huge windows. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Please, if you'll just look at my papers." Officer Chen cut her off mid-sentence, speaking over her head to Officer Roberts, as if Anna wasn't even there. "We can't just take papers at face value these days. Everything needs to be verified." The way she emphasized verified made it sound like she suspected the documents were fake. The crowd around them had grown larger, with some people openly filming the situation on their phones. Anna caught fragments of their whispered conversations. "Poor thing. This isn't right. Someone should do something." But their sympathy only made her feel more helpless, more like a spectacle than a person. A few feet away, her wheelchair was being taken apart piece by piece. Officer Roberts handled each component with unnecessary roughness, letting them clatter onto the metal inspection table. The special cushions her physical therapist had carefully adjusted, the control panel her dad had modified to be easier for her to use. All treated like suspicious objects rather than the essential parts of her daily life they were. "Look at all these modifications," Officer Roberts announced loudly, holding up the LED light strip Anna had been so proud of. These could be hiding anything. We'll need to remove all of them. Anna's heart sank as she watched him start peeling away the lights she had spent weeks installing with her dad, each tiny bowl representing a star in their special father-daughter project. The stuffed penguin she'd been clutching, her travel companion since she was 5, was yanked from her arms for inspection. No exceptions, Officer Chen stated coldly when Anna tried to explain its sentimental value. They turned it inside out, checking every seam, before tossing it back in her lap like a piece of trash. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as more people gathered to watch. Anna could hear a child asking their mother why the girl in the wheelchair was crying, and the mother's hushed response to be quiet. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she noticed some teenagers pointing their phones at her, probably sharing the moment on social media. The medical alert bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt heavy. It was supposed to make situations like this easier, not harder. She tried one more time to explain, her voice wavering but determined. My dad will be here any minute. He has copies of all my medical. Your dad isn't here now, is he? Officer Chen interrupted sharply. And we have procedures to follow, whether he's here or not. The dismissive tone made Anna's throat tight with unshed tears. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't let them see how much their actions hurt, but it was getting harder by the second. A kind-looking elderly gentleman stepped forward from the line, his voice firm but gentle. I'm a retired doctor, and I can see that wheelchair is clearly medical equipment. Surely there's a more dignified way to handle this security check. But Officer Roberts waved him away, threatening to call additional security if people didn't stay back. Anna's carefully planned trip was crumbling around her. The itinerary she'd spent weeks preparing lay scattered on the floor, pages getting stepped on by passing travelers. Her tablet, with all her pre-downloaded travel guides and accessibility maps, sat in a gray bin waiting to be inspected, along with her other belongings. The worst part wasn't the humiliation of being treated like a security threat, or even watching her wheelchair being dismantled. It was feeling like she had to justify her very presence in the airport, her right to travel like anyone else. Every question, every suspicious glance, every rough handling of her equipment sent the same message. You don't belong here. Through her tears, Anna caught sight of movement at the far end of the security area. A tall figure was making his way through the crowd, and for a moment, hope flickered in her chest. But it wasn't her father, just another traveler rushing to their gate. She had never felt so alone in a crowd of people, never more aware of how different the world saw her from how she saw herself. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted suddenly, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. A shadow fell across the security checkpoint, and the murmuring crowd grew quiet. Standing at his full height of 7 feet 1 inch, former NBA star Big Shaq O'Neal had arrived. His presence commanded attention without him saying a word, his face a mix of concern and barely contained anger as he took in the scene before him. He had only been gone 15 minutes to park the car and gather their carry-on bags. Now he found his daughter with tears streaming down her face, her wheelchair partially dismantled on a cold metal table, and 2 security officers who suddenly looked much less sure of themselves. The carry-on bags he held dropped softly to the floor as he processed what he was seeing. The crowd parted like water as he moved forward, his steps measured and deliberate. A few people recognized him, whispers of, "That's Big Shaq," rippling through the onlookers, but his focus remained entirely on his daughter. His first instinct was to rush to Anna, to wrap her in his protective embrace, but years of dealing with difficult situations had taught him the power of controlled responses. Officer Chen's stance changed immediately, her earlier arrogance dissolving as she realized who had just arrived. Officer Roberts suddenly became very interested in reorganizing the bins on the security table, avoiding eye contact with the imposing figure now standing before them. The phone cameras that had been recording Anna's humiliation now turned to capture what everyone expected would be an explosive confrontation. But Big Shaq had learned long ago that his size could either escalate a situation or calm it. Today, he chose calm. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of authority that had made him not just a basketball legend, but a successful businessman. Could someone please explain to me why my daughter's medical equipment is in pieces? The silence that followed was deafening. Through the terminal windows, planes could be seen taking off into the bright morning sky, a reminder of the journey that should have been filled with joy, not tears. Anna looked up at her father, seeing in his face not the anger she expected, but something more powerful, determination. He moved to stand beside Anna's chair, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The contrast was striking, his massive frame next to his daughter's smaller one, but both sharing the same unwavering dignity. The touch seemed to give Anna strength. She sat up straighter, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. Several passengers who had witnessed the entire incident started speaking at once, eager to tell Big Shaq what had happened. He raised his hand slightly, and they fell quiet. His focus remained on the security officers, who now seemed to find their shoes fascinating. The same authority that had once commanded basketball courts now filled the airport terminal. "My daughter," he began, his voice carrying clearly but calmly across the checkpoint, "has spent weeks planning this trip. She has every required document, every necessary certification. She has the right to travel with dignity, just like anyone else." Each word was measured, chosen carefully, teaching a lesson not just to the security officers, but to everyone watching. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the remnants of Anna's LED lights scattered across the inspection table. The stars she and her father had carefully attached to her wheelchair to make it feel less medical and more magical. Big Shaq noticed them immediately, and something in his expression softened further. This wasn't just about standing up to unfair treatment. It was about protecting the small ways his daughter found joy in her daily challenges. Officer Chen started to stammer out an explanation about protocol and procedures, but stopped when Big Shaq held up his hand again. The terminal had grown so quiet that the distant announcements of departing flights echoed unusually clearly. Everyone waited to see what this gentle giant would do next, expecting anger, but sensing that they were about to witness something far more powerful than rage. Without raising his voice or making a scene, Big Shaq reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The crowd watched, phone still recording, as he calmly scrolled through his contacts. Years of business dealings had taught him that sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. He found the number he was looking for, the airport's head of security, someone he'd met during one of his many business ventures. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Tom, it's Shaq. I'm at Terminal B security checkpoint, and we have a situation that needs your immediate attention." His voice remained steady, professional, but carried an undercurrent of urgency that couldn't be ignored. He didn't yell, didn't make threats. He didn't need to. Officer Chen and Officer Roberts exchanged nervous glances as they realized this wasn't going to play out the way they'd expected. They'd dealt with angry parents before, but this calculated professionalism was something entirely different. Within minutes, the rhythmic click of dress shoes on the terminal floor announced the arrival of several senior airport officials. The head of security, a tall woman with graying hair, took in the scene quickly: the dismantled wheelchair, the scattered medical documents, the tearful young girl, and the phone still recording everything. Her expression shifted from concern to determination as she gestured for her team to begin addressing the situation. "Mr. O'Neill," she said, extending her hand professionally. "I'd like to personally oversee this security screening, if you'll allow us." The respect in her voice was genuine, matched by her efficient handling of what had become a delicate situation. She turned to Anna, speaking directly to her with the dignity that had been missing earlier. "Young lady, I apologize for any distress you've experienced. Let's make this right." A specialized team was quickly assembled, people trained in handling medical equipment and working with passengers with special needs. They carefully began reassembling Anna's wheelchair, treating each piece with the respect it deserved. The LED lights were handled with particular care, one of the team members even offering suggestions about how to better secure them for future travels. Big Shaq stood quietly beside his daughter, his hand never leaving her shoulder. He watched as the proper procedures were finally followed, procedures that should have been implemented from the start. The difference was striking. Respectful questions instead of accusations, careful handling instead of rough treatment, and most importantly, speaking to Anna directly instead of over her head. The head of security pulled Big Shaq aside briefly, their conversation quiet but intense. He nodded several times, occasionally glancing at his daughter. It was clear that this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug, but would instead lead to meaningful changes. Officer Chen and Officer Roberts stood to the side, their earlier arrogance replaced by what appeared to be genuine reflection. Anna's spirits began to lift as she watched her wheelchair being properly reassembled. One of the senior staff members noticed her stuffed penguin looking a bit disheveled from the rough inspection and took a moment to straighten its bow tie, earning the first small smile anyone had seen from Anna since the ordeal began. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but not before several passengers approached the senior airport staff to share their accounts of what they'd witnessed. Each person who spoke up helped build a fuller picture of what had transpired, ensuring that the incident would be thoroughly documented and addressed. Throughout it all, Big Shaq maintained his calm demeanor, showing his daughter through actions rather than words how to handle difficult situations with grace. He could have used his celebrity status to demand immediate firings or make threats about lawsuits. Instead, he chose to demonstrate something more powerful: how to create positive change through professional, measured responses. As the proper security screening was completed, other passengers waiting in line watched a masterclass in dignity. The same officers who had caused such distress now stood witness to how the situation should have been handled from the start. The contrast was a lesson in itself, one that would stay with everyone who witnessed it long after the events of that morning. Instead of leaving the situation behind them and rushing to catch their flight, Big Shaq did something unexpected. He looked around at the gathered crowd, the security officers, the airline staff, the passengers who had witnessed everything, and saw an opportunity for something more important than catching a plane. His daughter watched curiously as he spoke quietly with the head of security, who nodded and began gathering everyone into a quieter area near an unused gate. The morning sun now streamed through the terminal windows at a different angle, casting long shadows across the airport floor. Big Shaq stood in the center of the small gathering, his presence commanding but not threatening. "I'd like to share something with all of you," he began, his deep voice carrying easily to everyone present. "This isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame. This is about understanding." He gestured to Anna, who wheeled forward slightly, her chair now properly reassembled, the LED lights catching the sunlight. "My daughter spent 3 weeks planning this trip. She researched everything: the best routes through airports, the most accessible tourist spots, even learned a few phrases in different languages." His voice filled with pride as he spoke about her preparation. Officer Chen and Officer Roberts, who had started the whole incident, stood to the side, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and growing understanding. Big Shaq turned to address them directly, but his words were meant for everyone. "Every day, my daughter faces challenges that most of us never think about. Simple things like going to school, visiting friends, or yes, taking a trip. They all require extra planning, extra effort." He pulled out his phone and showed a short video. Anna at her school science fair, explaining her project about accessibility in public spaces. The crowd watched as she confidently demonstrated how simple changes could make a huge difference in people's lives. "She doesn't let anything stop her," Big Shaq continued, "but sometimes it's not the physical barriers that hurt the most. It's the way people treat you when you're different." A young airport staff member raised her hand hesitantly. "I never realized how much thought goes into traveling with a disability," she admitted. "We get training, but it's not the same as hearing it firsthand." Others nodded in agreement, and suddenly more people began sharing their own experiences. A flight attendant who had a brother with cerebral palsy, a passenger whose elderly mother struggled with mobility. The conversation flowed naturally, turning into an impromptu learning session. Anna found her voice too, sharing her perspective with growing confidence. She explained how her wheelchair wasn't just a piece of medical equipment. It was her independence, her freedom, decorated with lights because she wanted it to reflect her personality, not her limitations. Officer Chen stepped forward, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine remorse. "I got caught up in following procedures," she admitted, "and forgot there was a person, a young girl, at the center of it all." Her words resonated with many of the staff members present, who nodded in recognition of times they might have done the same. The head of security took notes throughout the discussion, jotting down suggestions for improving their protocols. But more importantly, everyone present was learning something that couldn't be found in any training manual: the human side of their work, the impact their actions could have on someone's dignity and spirit. Big Shaq shared stories about how small acts of kindness and understanding had made huge differences in their lives. He talked about restaurant owners who quietly rearranged tables without being asked, teachers who found creative ways to include Anna in all activities, and strangers who showed patience and empathy instead of annoyance or pity. The morning's tension had transformed into something unexpected, a moment of genuine connection and learning. People who had been strangers an hour ago were now engaged in meaningful conversation about how to make the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder. Even some of the passengers who had missed their flights chose to stay, drawn into this impromptu community of understanding. 1 month after that memorable morning at the airport, the changes were already visible. The head of security had kept her word. Both immediate and long-term improvements were put into action. Walking through Terminal B now, you'd see new training sessions taking place, with staff members learning not just procedures, but the human side of their work. Officer Chen and Officer Roberts hadn't lost their jobs. Instead, they'd become unlikely champions for change within the airport system. They shared their experience during training sessions, explaining how that morning had opened their eyes. "We thought we were just following protocol," Officer Chen would say, "but we learned that treating people with dignity should always be the first protocol." Big Shaq had taken the story to his massive social media following, not to shame anyone, but to start a bigger conversation. His post showing Anna's decorated wheelchair and sharing their experience went viral, touching hearts across the world. Soon, other families began sharing their own stories of traveling with disabilities, creating a wave of awareness that couldn't be ignored. The airport implemented a new program called Wings of Understanding, inspired by Anna's experience. Special needs passengers could now request trained staff members who understood both the security requirements and the importance of maintaining dignity throughout the screening process. The LED lights that had once been treated with suspicion became a symbol of personal expression that security staff were trained to respect. Anna's influence reached far beyond that one morning. She started a video blog about accessible travel, sharing tips and experiences with others who dreamed of exploring the world despite their challenges. Her first video showed her triumphantly arriving at their vacation destination, proving that one difficult morning couldn't stop her adventure. The ripple effects continued to spread. Other airports began reaching out, wanting to learn from the changes being implemented. Big Shaq and Anna were invited to speak at transportation safety conferences, where Anna's perspective helped shape new policies that balanced security needs with human dignity. Her father would stand proudly in the background, watching his daughter turn a moment of humiliation into a movement for positive change. Local schools began inviting Anna to speak about accessibility and understanding. She would wheel onto stages, her LED lights twinkling, and share her story with students. "It's not about being treated specially," she would explain. "It's about being treated equally." The students were particularly fascinated by her decorated wheelchair, and soon it became common to see other mobility devices sporting personal touches inspired by Anna's style. The story caught the attention of disability rights organizations across the country. They worked with Big Shaq and Anna to develop comprehensive training programs for public spaces, not just airports, but shopping malls, theaters, and sports venues. The focus wasn't on what went wrong that morning, but on how to make things right for everyone. 6 months later, Anna and her father returned to the same airport for another trip. The difference was striking. New signs clearly marked accessible routes. Staff members approached them with understanding and respect, and other travelers with disabilities moved through security with dignity. The special security line now had staff specifically trained in handling medical equipment, and there was a gentleness in their approach that hadn't existed before. The greatest change, though, was in the small moments. A young security officer carefully admiring a child's decorated mobility scooter. A staff member taking extra time to explain procedures to an elderly traveler. The way people in line would naturally make space for someone struggling with mobility, not with pity, but with simple human kindness. As Anna and her father prepared to board their flight, they passed Officer Chen at her security post. She smiled warmly, remembering how a difficult morning had led to meaningful change. Anna's LED lights twinkled as she wheeled past, a reminder that sometimes the best way to light up the darkness is to become a beacon of change yourself.